Hey everybody, it's Janice Shortle with a little extra breaking the news on the Plus app. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about that Wisconsin Supreme Court election because, it's over. Thankfully, Danny Spiewak joins again, our political specialist here at KARE 11. You've been covering this race for how long?
Gosh, probably, several weeks. I feel like we've been talking about it pretty much since the November election. Once you got past the new year, especially into March, and Elon Musk got involved, it'd been a national story. So I think we did our first story in early March and basically been following it ever since.
So all day yesterday, after we talked and around the newsroom, we're talking about who's going to win this race. We didn't have any real polling. It was, more than $100 million spent. All eyes watching Wisconsin. We know by 9:30. Judge Crawford wins by 10 points. Were you surprised?
I was surprised it came in that quickly, and I think I was surprised by the margin as well. I could have seen it really going either way, and like you said, it was an unknown, not like a presidential or even a midterm election where you sort of have a sense of who's favored and who's not. This was a judicial race, so who even knows what the candidate name recognition is, that sort of thing. And so the fact that Crawford won by 10 points certainly significant and does send a message. To what extent we don't know, but does send a message that at least in Wisconsin. There was a high Democratic turnout for this election and a lot of motivation to defeat somebody that was backed by President Trump and Elon Musk.
Elon Musk is the elephant in the room in this race. If you open a national publication today, New York Times, Washington Post, you watch national news shows, they're all talking about what happened in Wisconsin as this referendum on the Trump administration. But the way I look at it is really, we saw very little of Trump. He didn't go to Wisconsin and hold big rallies. This was all Elon Musk. And it does look bad that all Elon Musk was there constantly giving away millions of dollars, and Wisconsin said no.
And we were talking about how long we've been just covering this race here at KARE 11. I even noticed a shift in the campaigns from early March until last week, where we went to Hudson for Judge Crawford's event. And it was very much a referendum on Musk. I mean, Trump was talked about, but she turned it into a referendum on Elon Musk specifically. What do you think of his Doge cuts? And what do you think of all those sorts of things? And clearly that resonated with certain voters across the state.
And so in the postmortem, again, it's about a referendum on Trump or Musk or this, that, or the other thing. And what I found interesting, too, was this was not the only thing that the people of Wisconsin voted on yesterday. So those two other issues, talk about them and how they kind of play into a bigger picture that kind of shows that Elon Musk had an effect on this Supreme Court race that was not in his favor, whereas in the other two races, what happened? Yeah,
when you talk about the one was to enshrine voter ID rights into the Constitution in Wisconsin. It's already the law, but this would be a kind of a stronger thing for voter ID, which we know is typically, not exclusively, but typically supported more probably by Republican voters than Democrats. But that passed, and then you had the school superintendent race that was a little bit closer. I think it was a 6-point margin, as we were talking about, for kind of a more probably Democratic associated candidate. Again, it's not like the parties were running against each other. But yeah, like you mentioned, the results in those races showed that Wisconsin's more of a mixed bag than a 10-point victory for a Supreme Court justice of the liberal candidate. I think it does show that there probably was a pretty significant impact from Elon Musk in a negative way.
I know you had the chance to talk to some political analysts today about that Musk effect and about Wisconsin's kind of identity as being Wisconsin. Minnesota, Wisconsin, we're not super known for having these billionaires fly into our cities and our towns and invest in our state or local races. And that's what happened. And that can somehow, it could, we could never really say for sure because we're not going to talk to every single voter, but that could have an effect. Wisconsins don't really, it's not their bag,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Elon Musk really kind of leaned into that, wearing the cheese head and coming out to the Packers Bang on the Drum song, the touchdown song at his event in Green Bay. And certainly there are a lot of people that liked it. There are a lot of people at that, a lot of people at that event, and there's a lot of people that probably view him positively. But I think for the voters that were turning out, it was such a negative thing for those voters that it really, in many ways, it looks like a voter turnout and Democratic voter turnout surged in the big cities. You're talking about Madison and Milwaukee. You're talking about Crawford compared to the 2023 Supreme Court race where a liberal defeated a conservative, she earned 30 to 50,000 more votes in Madison and Milwaukee in each of those than her predecessor did in 2023, the candidate who won that seat 2 years ago. So it just shows you, I think, that she was winning by big margins, and she was running up the score, for a football analogy, in the big liberal strongholds of places like Madison and Milwaukee, and you have to think some of that has to be just sort of maybe that anger from Democratic voters about President Trump and then Elon Musk by association.
Yeah, and we don't even, could be anger from any voter about, even if you agree with cuts being made, and yes, is there too much bloat in our government? Probably. How they're being done. People losing their jobs in a way that they go to work and their computer is frozen and no one's told them what's going on. It doesn't seem very kind. It doesn't seem very Midwestern. It doesn't, we've heard stories from veterans, all that. And everybody, the human psyche likes to blame somebody. And it seems like that somebody is Elon Musk.
And I was talking to a Republican analyst, Brian McClung, who we talked to a lot for KARE 11. He was a former spokesperson for Governor Pawlenty, a Republican, of course. And he said that this probably will cause the Republicans to reassess Musk's role. But like I was saying, not that he's totally unpopular among Republican voters, but I think it just is an example that perhaps spending all that money and being that present in an election like this maybe ended up backfiring.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, and because Judge Crawford also got money. We've talked about that quite a bit. We've never not talked about the fact that she got money from philanthropist George Soros, often gives to Democrats, Democratic causes, and she got from J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, but we didn't see those people. That was just, you send the money to help them out. This was very different. This was, here's all the money, and I'm going to tweet about it all day long, and I'm going to be here. Just a kind of a different approach.
Yeah, and his money that he spent just really dwarfed anything on the Democratic side. Although, yes, we've talked and reported a lot about the big money that was being spent of special interests or outside interests on Judge Crawford as well. But you're right, the visibility of Musk, and I don't even know to what extent Brad Schimmel, who we haven't even mentioned.
I was just going to say that. We haven't even talked about the actual person that won and Brad Schimmel, the actual candidates. What I think lends to the credibility of perhaps the media is getting this all wrong, but we're not able to look away from this $100+ million put into a campaign that literally drowned out the candidates' voices.
Yeah, and who knows, to what extent Schimmel really invited Musk's participation. It obviously helped to have the ads, but and it's hard to say just how much of an impact this had. Maybe it's just voter anger coming off of the pendulum, of 2024, and now we're 6 months later, and the other thing I want to be careful about too is that I don't think this is totally a predictor of the midterms.
No, I don't either.
I think obviously that's a long way away, and this was a very unique race, a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. It was a one kind of, it was one race in the country at a weird time also.
Right.
And so a lot of attention on it. So
yeah, it gets a lot of attention because it's the only one. I mean, obviously there were a couple of seats in Florida that were up, but they were in huge Republican districts. It wasn't really a question if the Republicans were going to win. I mean, they did. But Wisconsin was a swing state, is a swing state, and it gave political pundits something to report on as an election. They couldn't look around. Yes, if 40 states were voting yesterday, I don't think Wisconsin would have gotten this much attention. But because it was the one.
Yeah, and I try to even be cognizant of that too, with obviously it's so important and there's such a spotlight on it, and we cover parts of Wisconsin, so it was very important for us to cover. But I do try not to make it so extreme, like, this is the biggest race ever, and this, it was definitely something Democrats needed to win just to feel like they were improving, because their favorability ratings have gotten so low following 2024. So the National Democratic Party has got to be excited about it, but we'll see what happens in a couple of years. They have a lot of work to do with voters.
And the people of Wisconsin can now just kick back, relax, and just wait for football season.
Yeah,
and the Green Bay Packers. They won't be inundated with national reporters coming to every town, going to Chippewa Falls, going to Madison, going to anywhere you can think of, Barron, just to talk to the average voter. But let's talk about turnout. Because when we talk about all of this attention and money going in, it has its pluses and negatives, and you could really spin it either way. But a lot of people in Wisconsin voted yesterday.
Yeah, it was more than 2 million. I think it was something like 2.3 million in comparison, 2023 Supreme Court race, which was another big one. It was the previous record. was of spending 2023, and the Liberals flipped the court that year. That was like 1.8 million. So you're talking about, if my math is correct, and it might not be, I think it was like about a 28% increase compared to that one. So it wasn't quite obviously to a presidential election turnout, but it was big. And when you look like county by county, I just was struck by just how many more Democratic voters came out compared to the last Supreme Court election, because it's a better comparison, in the places like Dane County where Madison is, or in places like Milwaukee.
Because it was the same thing, right? That was an ideological balance election the last time around.
Right.
And this was the same thing with a lot more people voting in it. Why is that?
I think just probably 2023. Now, 2023 was important because it was following the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Right.
So that was much a referendum on abortion rights in the state. But I think coming off the presidential election, this was just, there was more, it was probably fresher in voters' minds as opposed to coming off of a midterm. And so I think this, you just had this presidential election, you've got all this national attention. I think it just drove people to the polls in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have if it was another type of off year.
Interesting. I want to talk about the candidates. I know that they both obviously gave their speeches to their supporters last night. Judge Crawford did, and I think she brought up Elon Musk and that they defeated Elon Musk, or the people that voted for her did. And then I was really struck by Brad Schimmel's concession speech. It was very short. It was really interesting because Brad Schimmel, I did not know, was in like a rock band. So he was like playing rock songs by the Allman Band, and then he stopped to give his 3-minute concession speech. But what struck me, Danny, is that he started to talk about they didn't have the numbers to win. He was very clear that he lost the election and that they lost by a significant margin. And a couple of people in the crowd at his rally or his election party started to yell things like cheater, rigged, and he stopped them. And he said, no, we will not do this. We will accept the results of an election. And that, it should go without saying, but we have to say it now. That's important. It's important to concede when you lost. That's what makes this whole process work.
And Brad Schimmel was very much his own candidate as well. And we're talking to him and doing an interview with him last week. He is correct to an extent that he and Crawford as well can't control all of the outside interests that get involved. And so he announced the campaign, like a while ago. I want to say it was like a year and a half ago. And so, he was running a race, and he had like platforms just like a regular candidate, outside of the whole national stuff.
Right.
He was endorsed by law enforcement. He talked about public safety. He talked about restoring objectivity to the court in his view. I think he had an analogy he had on the campaign trail that he felt the current court was like umpires showing up to a Brewers game wearing Cardinals jerseys, saying with their, but that's like the type of thing you hear on a regular campaign trail. So it got so nationalized, but he had a platform too. He was defeated, and by double digits, it looks like. But he and Crawford both were very much their own candidates with their own backgrounds and their own platforms. So voters, maybe they did see some of that. There was so much else with the two candidates associated with, but just purely their campaigns, it's I guess we just don't know how much voters looked at those records as opposed to the national stuff. Yeah,
and to me, that's disappointing. It's not the voters' fault. It's basically like being hit with an avalanche of national, often negative media. And if I would love to just talk to voters all over the state of Wisconsin to see if they were able to find out the things about the candidates that they needed to know to make an informed decision. Not the national campaigns and money being poured in to say, this person's aligned with Trump, this person's aligned with Elon Musk, she's aligned with George Soros, she's aligned with Pritzker and Biden and whoever else. If they actually got a chance to look at Judge Schimmel and Judge Crawford and say, this is the person I want on the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Yeah, and we forget too that there are real issues that impact people.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying, real Wisconsin issues. So I get to make a decision if I live in Wisconsin about who I want on my court. To talk about my state that I live in and raise my family in and run my business in, right?
Yeah, and that's why I think there was just some uncomfortable feelings really on, of voters of all types about just the amount of money that was being spent in the state by people who weren't from the state. That is to an extent just how things work these days. But there was just, with it was just I think we talked about this last time, just seemed like a perfect storm of events of everything kind of like centralizing on Wisconsin for all these different reasons.
Well, Wisconsin got their day in court. See what I did there?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, a little judicial humor for the Supreme Court.
A little judicial humor. Oh, don't get me started on the Federalist Papers, Danny, because we were talking about that today on Breaking the News. You know, this was never our founders' idea that we have elections for judges. They wanted to keep that separate. Alexander Hamilton wrote it. And if Alexander Hamilton and the founders were alive today to see $100 million spent by outside sources who do have partisan ideals pouring into a judicial election for the state Supreme Court, whoo, they would not be happy.
I'm about to watch the story. I love history, but I don't know a lot about the Federalist Papers. So
Danny!
I'm about to brush up on my, I'm good at like the 20th century.
You don't have a favorite Federalist paper?
No, I got to develop one, I guess, but I have seen Hamilton though, not on Broadway, but I did see it at the Orpheum. So
we're going to have to create a show for KARE 11 Plus, a Breaking the News Extra, where you and me have a few drinks and read some Federalist Papers.
That sounds great. Yeah,
I mean,
that's great TV right there.
Well, it's been a pleasure to cover this race with you. I can't lie. I'm happy it's over, and I'm glad that the Wisconsin voters came out en masse and got to have their say. And in the end, it affects the people of Wisconsin, and that we move forward from here, like Judge Schimble said so eloquently in his concession speech last night. It was really good.
Well,
thank you, Danny. Yeah, and we'll see you next time on Breaking the News Extra on KARE 11 Plus.